The leather-clad rebel thought he could outsmart the system. 6 unpaid tickets, a demolished city fence, and a lie so audacious it would shake the entire courtroom to its core. But when this motorcycle gang member made one fatal mistake, insulting Judge Frank Caprio to his face, everything changed. What the judge said next didn't just silence the courtroom, it rewrote the biker's entire future. This is the story of Ryan Cooper. And before we reveal the jaw-dropping moment that brought a hardened biker to his knees, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness proves one undeniable truth. Even the most defiant rebels meet their match in Judge Caprio's courtroom. The morning had started like any other in Providence Municipal Court. Papers rustled softly. Shoes tapped against polished floors. The rhythmic thud of Judge Caprio's gavel punctuated the steady flow of cases. A parking violation dismissed with a kind word. A meter dispute resolved with laughter. The courtroom carried that familiar warmth, the signature atmosphere of Judge Caprio's domain. Then, the clerk's voice cut through the gentle hum. City of Providence versus Ryan Cooper. The double doors exploded open. He strode in like a conquering warrior entering enemy territory. Tall, lean, wrapped in black leather that creaked with every calculated step. A matte black motorcycle helmet tucked under one arm like a trophy. Dark aviator sunglasses still covering his eyes. Indoors, his boots struck the marble floor with deliberate echoing thuds that commanded attention from every person in that courtroom. Row by row, heads turned. The file bearing his name sat on Judge Caprio's bench, thick enough to require a rubber band to contain it. The judge glanced down at the stack of papers. Then slowly, deliberately, he looked up at the defendant standing before him. A knowing smile flickered across Caprio's weathered face. "Good morning," the judge said, his voice carrying that trademark warmth. "Looks like the road followed you right into my courtroom." Ryan Cooper didn't return the smile. He stopped at the podium, planted his helmet beside the microphone like he was marking territory, and casually pushed his sunglasses up onto his head. His eyes, ice blue, piercing, simultaneously challenging and bored, locked onto the judge. The clerk began reading, her voice crisp and professional. Mr. Cooper is cited for multiple unpaid parking violations, failure to appear on prior summonses, reckless operation of a motorcycle, and damage to public property, specifically, destruction of a municipal fence at the intersection of Richmond and Pine. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. The bailiff's gaze dropped briefly to the defendant's forearms, covered in intricate tattoos, winding exhaust pipe patterns, racing flags, symbols of a life lived at full throttle. Ryan kept his chin high, his posture radiating defiance. This wasn't his first rodeo. He'd played this game before. Judge Caprio folded his hands on the bench. "Mr. Cooper, you've brought quite an impressive stack of violations with you today." Ryan's mouth curled into a smirk. "Guess the city just can't get enough of me, Judge." Scattered chuckles from the gallery. But Caprio didn't take the bait. "Let's start with something simple," the judge continued. "Are you part of an organized motorcycle group?" "A club," Ryan corrected, his tone sharp but measured. "We build bikes. We ride. We bring life to dead streets." Caprio tapped the thick file. "And to parking meters, apparently." The smirk widened. "Meters don't have feelings, Judge." "They don't," Caprio agreed, his smile thinning. "But they do have rules. And those rules matter even more when the owner of the motorcycle doesn't show up for 6 consecutive court dates." Ryan shrugged, leather creaking with the motion. "We were busy." "Busy doing what, exactly?" Caprio's voice remained mild, conversational. "Racing," someone whispered from the back of the courtroom. The word floated forward like a challenge thrown at the judge's feet. Ryan rolled his shoulders, the leather jacket catching the fluorescent light. "We ride," he said simply. Sometimes fast, that's what happens. Judge Caprio let a beat of silence pass. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, sensing something shifting in the atmosphere, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Here's what I see, Mr. Cooper," the judge said, his tone still gentle but now edged with steel. "A string of unpaid tickets, ignored court summonses, and one particular afternoon when your motorcycle put a municipal fence permanently out of commission. You want to tell me about that day?" Ryan leaned toward the microphone, his voice dropping to a smooth, confident drawl. "I was heading to the hospital, Judge. My wife, she's pregnant. She called me, said it was time, the baby was coming. I wasn't thinking about fences or traffic laws. I was thinking about getting there before my child was born." The gallery shifted. Even the clerk glanced up, her expression softening. It was a sympathetic story. A compelling reason. The kind of emergency that could excuse almost anything. But Judge Caprio's expression remained unchanged. He looked down at the police report, studying the timestamp carefully, read the officer's detailed narrative, turned to the second page, then the third. The rubber band snapped softly against his thumb as he processed the information. 4:06 p.m., Caprio read aloud. "Reckless operation of a motorcycle." Then again at 7:02 p.m. Same route, opposite direction, same motorcycle. He looked up, his eyes sharp and probing. "Mr. Cooper, your wife was supposedly in labor for 3 hours while you circled downtown Providence?" Ryan's confident gaze flickered, just for an instant. "I had to grab a bag," he said quickly. "Her hospital bag. Then I went back." "Of course." Caprio's voice stayed even, almost gentle. "We'll verify that with the hospital. In the meantime, Mr. Cooper, do you understand why you're standing in this courtroom today?" The smirk returned to Ryan's face, bold and brazen. "To pay a fine and get lectured about being a good boy." Several heads turned sharply in the gallery. The bailiff's stance tightened, his hand moving unconsciously closer to his belt. But Judge Caprio didn't rise to the provocation. "You're here," the judge said quietly, "because our streets belong to more than just machines and the men who ride them. They belong to everyone who hopes to make it home safely at the end of the day." Ryan tilted his head, processing the words like a foreign language he'd heard, but never bothered to learn. "Judge, with all due respect," he made the word sound like an obstacle to drive around. "Roads are for riding. That's what motorcycles are built for." Caprio nodded once, slowly, deliberately. "And courts are for listening. That's exactly what we're going to do." He set the file down carefully, palms flat on the bench. The warmth in the courtroom shifted, not gone but cooling by degrees. Still civil, but now attentive, focused, like the tense silence before a race begins. "All right, Mr. Cooper," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying a new weight. "Tell me exactly what happened at Richmond and Pine, from the very beginning. No smoke, no mirrors. Just the truth." Ryan's grin lingered on his face, but something harder glinted in his eyes. He tapped his helmet with one knuckle, the sound echoing like a challenge. "From the start," he said. "Sure thing, Judge. From the very start." And for the first time since this leather-clad rebel had swaggered through those courtroom doors, a current of anticipation, electric and dangerous, rippled through the gallery. The file lay between the bench and the podium, like a weight that couldn't be ignored. The road had found its way into Judge Caprio's courtroom, and it was about to learn some very hard lessons about the rules. Ryan tapped his helmet against the podium like a drummer, keeping time to a song only he could hear. "All right," he began, his voice rough with confidence. "You want the whole story? Here it is. I was heading to the hospital. My wife's pregnant. Due any day. She called me in a panic, said she was going into labor. I wasn't thinking about parking tickets or fences, Judge. I was thinking about my kid being born. about being there for the biggest moment of our lives. A low murmur of sympathy drifted through the gallery. It was a powerful narrative. Relatable, human. Judge Caprio nodded once, his expression carefully neutral. "That certainly sounds like a serious emergency," he said evenly. "Which hospital did you go to? St. Mary's?" "St. Mary's," Ryan confirmed without hesitation. "South entrance. You can call them if you want to verify." Caprio flipped through the police report, his eyes scanning the timestamps with practiced precision. "The officer says he cited you at 4 p.m. for reckless operation near Richmond and Pine." He turned another page, his finger tracing down the document. "And then again at 7 p.m. Same location, same direction of travel, same motorcycle." Ryan's confident grin faltered for just a heartbeat. "Yeah, well, she was in labor for a long time. I had to go home and grab her hospital bag. You know how it is. The baby doesn't wait for anyone." Judge Caprio looked up, his gaze calm but razor sharp. "So you're telling me you rode your motorcycle for 3 hours through downtown Providence traffic, left the hospital, went home to get a bag, and then rode back again?" "Exactly," Ryan said, spreading his hands. "That's what you do when you love someone, right?" A few quiet laughs rippled from the back of the courtroom. But Judge Caprio wasn't smiling. He signaled to his clerk with a subtle gesture. "Would you please call St. Mary's Hospital? Ask if they had any patient admitted under the name Mrs. Cooper on the 15th of this month." Ryan shifted his weight, trying to maintain his amused expression, but his fingers began tapping faster on the helmet. A nervous tell. "You don't believe me," he said, his voice carrying a slight edge. Caprio's tone remained patient, measured. "I always believe people until the facts prove otherwise, Mr. Cooper. But this court also has a responsibility to verify the truth." The clerk returned several minutes later, leaning close to whisper something to the judge. The courtroom watched in tense silence as Caprio listened, then slowly exhaled. "No record," the judge said quietly. "St. Mary's has no record of any admission under that name on the 15th. He looked directly at Ryan. "Would you like to try a different hospital?" Ryan's smirk came back, but now it looked brittle, like glass under pressure. "Maybe you called the wrong one. There are several hospitals in Providence." "We called them all, Mr. Cooper." The words fell like a hammer. Silence spread across the courtroom, like fog rolling in from the ocean. Heavy, suffocating, undeniable. Finally, Ryan shrugged, his defiance kicking back in to fill the uncomfortable void. "Fine. Maybe she wasn't actually in labor after all. Point is, I didn't mean to break anything. It was an accident." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "So there was no emergency? No wife in labor? No hospital? You were simply racing through city streets?" Ryan smirked. Recovered now. "We call it riding, Judge. That's what motorcycles are built for." "And fences?" Caprio asked quietly. "What are they built for?" Ryan chuckled under his breath. "Collateral damage, I guess." That line landed like a slap across the face. The gallery went completely still. The bailiff's hand moved instinctively toward his belt, prepared for trouble that hadn't started yet but felt inevitable. Even the court reporter looked up from her keyboard, eyes wide. Judge Caprio placed his pen down with careful precision. He folded his hands on the bench, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on the entire room. "Mr. Cooper, lying under oath in this courtroom is not a game. It's a serious criminal offense." Ryan tilted his head, the smirk widening defiantly. "Then write me another ticket, Judge. Add it to the pile." Caprio's jaw flexed. "You're not taking this seriously." "Why should I?" Ryan shot back. "The city loves squeezing bikers for every dollar. Maybe this is just payback because we make more noise than your fancy cars and your perfect little citizens." The judge's voice hardened. Just a fraction. But everyone heard it. Noise isn't the problem here, Mr. Cooper. Disrespect is. The biker rolled his shoulders, utterly unconcerned. Same thing to you old guys, isn't it? Anyone who doesn't fall in line is showing disrespect. A ripple of tension moved through the courtroom like an electric current. Judge Caprio sat very still, his eyes narrowing with focused intensity. Careful, he said, the single word carrying more warning than 1,000-word lecture. Ryan's smirk widened, emboldened by an audience. What? I can't speak my mind in here? You absolutely can, Caprio replied, his voice low but firm as iron. But you might not like what happens when you do. The gallery fell into absolute silence. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz more softly, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Judge Caprio opened the file again, his legendary patience wearing visibly thinner. You have 6 unpaid traffic citations, Mr. Cooper. You've ignored every single court summons. You lied under oath about a medical emergency. And now you're standing in my courtroom acting like this is all some kind of joke. Ryan leaned toward the microphone, his voice dripping with theatrical mockery. Maybe that's because it is a joke, Judge. The words hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Caprio's expression didn't change, but something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of that courtroom. The warmth that usually filled his domain drained away completely, replaced by something colder, heavier, more dangerous. He folded the thick file shut with a quiet thud that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. All right, Mr. Cooper, Judge Caprio said softly, each word measured and deliberate. If you insist on treating this courtroom like a game, then let's see how well you handle losing. That single sentence, let's see how well you handle losing, seemed to hang in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to ignore. Ryan's smirk flickered for just a second, but he quickly hid the uncertainty behind a dismissive scoff. He wasn't backing down. Not yet. Judge Caprio picked up a manila folder from his desk and handed it to the bailiff. Mr. Cooper, these are photographs taken by the responding officer at the scene of your incident. Would you like to take a look before we continue? Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. Sure, why not? The bailiff placed the stack of photographs on the podium in front of him. Ryan glanced down, and for the first time, his expression showed something other than arrogant confidence. The images were damning. His black motorcycle tilted at an awkward angle against a section of twisted, crumpled fencing. Deep tire tracks carved through the concrete curb like scars. A metal trash receptacle lay crushed at an unnatural angle, its contents scattered across the sidewalk. Broken glass glittered in the afternoon sun, captured in the photograph. Judge Caprio spoke evenly, his voice cutting through the silence. That fence you destroyed, Mr. Cooper, it wasn't just a random piece of city property. It guarded a pedestrian walkway that leads directly to a daycare center. 37 children between the ages of 2 and 5 use that walkway every single day. The gallery gasped audibly. Ryan barely looked up from the photos. Well, no one actually got hurt, right? So what's the big deal? Caprio's tone sharpened like a blade being drawn. That's not remotely the point, Mr. Cooper, Ryan snorted, pushing the photos away. Yeah, I get it. Rules, laws, respect. You people love throwing those words around. You people, Caprio repeated quietly, letting the phrase sit in the air. Ryan shrugged again, his defiance building. Judges, cops, government types, the ones who've never lived in the real world. A few murmurs stirred in the gallery, some disapproving, others whispering his name, like they recognized exactly what kind of man stood before them. The kind who'd been coddled by excuses his entire life. The kind who confused rebellion with strength. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting with surgical precision. "And what world do you live in, Mr. Cooper? Enlighten us." Ryan's smirk returned, bold and defiant. "The real one, Judge. The one where you work hard with your own two hands, where you fix your bike yourself, where you ride with your brothers and don't let anyone tell you where you can park or how fast you can go. That's freedom." Caprio sat back, studying him with an expression that mixed disappointment with something that might have been sympathy, but only for a moment. "You think that's freedom?" "That's exactly what it is," Ryan said, his voice rising with conviction. "We don't hurt people. We don't steal. We just ride. But you people act like that's some kind of crime." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his face unreadable. "No one is condemning you for riding motorcycles, Mr. Cooper. But freedom without responsibility isn't freedom at all. It's chaos, dressed up in leather and chrome." Ryan's smirk returned, smug and satisfied. "You sound like a motivational poster, Judge." Caprio ignored the jab completely. "Let's talk about your hospital story again." Ryan frowned, caught off guard by the sudden shift. "What about it?" "You told this court, under oath, that your wife was in labor. You said you were racing to the hospital for the birth of your child. You even gave us the specific hospital name and entrance." Caprio flipped through the file again, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "That was a lie, wasn't it?" Ryan's jaw clenched. "You have no proof of that." Judge Caprio looked up, his gaze steady and unrelenting. "The proof, Mr. Cooper, is that your alleged wife filed a statement with the police officer after your last citation." He paused, letting the moment build. "She told him, and I quote, 'He's not my husband. We're not married. We never were.'" A shockwave of gasps swept through the courtroom. Someone in the gallery audibly gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Ryan's smirk dropped entirely this time, his face flushing red. Judge Caprio's gaze remained locked on the defendant, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "So, not only did you lie about your situation, Mr. Cooper, you attempted to exploit human sympathy and compassion to escape responsibility for your actions. That's not courage. That's not brotherhood. That's pure, calculated cowardice." Ryan's face flushed a deep crimson, anger flaring to hide the shame spreading across his features. "You don't know anything about me," he snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't have to know you," Caprio replied, his voice steady as granite. "You've told me everything I need to know through your actions and your lies." Ryan slammed his hand down on the podium, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. "I don't care what you think. You can't tell me how to live my life." Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Then don't walk into this courtroom asking for mercy, because that's not how any of this works." Ryan clenched his fists, shaking his head in barely contained rage. "You think you're better than me, sitting up there in your fancy robe with your self-righteous speeches?" Caprio's tone dropped to the most dangerous quiet the courtroom had heard all day. "I think I've earned the right to expect honesty in this room, and you've spit in the face of that expectation." Ryan laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Honesty? You want to lecture me about honesty? I've worked with guys who risk their lives fixing the roads you people drive on every single day. I've seen cops ticket innocent people and walk away like nothing happened. So don't you dare talk to me about honesty." Judge Caprio didn't flinch. He simply placed his hands flat on the bench and spoke with deliberate, measured intensity. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Cooper. The world isn't perfect. The system has flaws. People make mistakes. But none of that, absolutely none of it, excuses lying under oath. It doesn't excuse endangering innocent people. And it certainly doesn't excuse you." Ryan glared up at him, breathing hard, his chest heaving. The mask was cracking. The bravado was slipping. "You can't scare me, old man," he spat. The entire courtroom seemed to freeze in that instant. Time itself stopped. Even Ryan seemed to realize, too late, that he'd crossed a line no defendant should ever cross. Judge Caprio removed his glasses with slow, deliberate precision. He set them down on the bench with careful attention, and when he looked up, his eyes carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. "What did you just say?" His voice was quiet. Deadly quiet. Ryan hesitated, his bravado warring with sudden uncertainty. But pride won out. He doubled down instead of backing off. "You heard me, Judge." Caprio exhaled slowly, his expression now completely unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was low, steady, and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "You just made this personal, Mr. Cooper." The gallery held its collective breath. Not a single person moved. The silence was so complete, you could hear hearts beating. "You walked in here thinking the law was something you could mock," Caprio continued, each word landing like a hammer. "You thought this was a game you could play, some kind of street theater where you could show off for your friends." He leaned forward, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "But this is not a racetrack, Mr. Cooper, and I am not your opponent. You challenged this courtroom. You challenged the law. You challenged basic human decency." Ryan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly, but he said nothing. "And now," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you're about to learn what losing really feels like." The silence that followed was crushing, the kind that feels louder than any shouting match could ever be. And when Caprio finally spoke again, every ounce of his legendary patience had evaporated. Ryan stood at the podium, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against the edge of his motorcycle helmet. The defiance in his posture remained obvious, the aggressive tilt of his chin, the smirk that kept returning like a reflex he couldn't control, even in the face of mounting consequences. Judge Caprio sat back for a long moment, letting the silence do its work. Then, in a calm but razor-sharp voice, he said, "Mr. Cooper, you currently face 6 unpaid citations, 1 charge of reckless operation, 1 count of destruction of public property, and now 1 count of contempt for lying under oath. Would you like to keep adding to that list?" Ryan gave a sharp, bitter laugh. "You really think a few tickets are going to scare me? You old folks love your rules because they're the only thing that makes you feel important anymore." The gallery collectively inhaled. Several people shook their heads in disbelief. Even hardened regulars of the courtroom looked shocked. Caprio's tone stayed even, but the edge in it sharpened like a knife being honed. "What makes me feel important, Mr. Cooper, is watching people walk out of this courtroom having learned something valuable about themselves and the world. But I suppose that doesn't happen every single day." Ryan leaned forward, his voice dripping with theatrical politeness laced with venom. "Well then, maybe today's your lucky day, Your Honor." The murmur that rippled through the gallery was louder this time, a wave of disbelief that someone would dare speak to Judge Frank Caprio this way. The judge tilted his head slightly. "Is that a threat, Mr. Cooper?" Ryan grinned, emboldened by his own recklessness. "It's a statement, Judge. I've seen plenty of judges who talk tough and hand out fines just to feel powerful. But when I walk out of here, I'll still have my bike, my freedom, and my brothers waiting for me outside. You can't touch any of that." Caprio's hands clasped together on the bench. "And that's what you believe freedom is? The ability to ignore consequences?" Ryan shrugged, cocky again. "It's my right as an American. I ride where I want. I live how I want. Nobody can cage that spirit." Judge Caprio let the words hang in the air for a moment, then spoke with quiet intensity. "Freedom, Mr. Cooper, isn't simply the absence of rules. It's the presence of respect for others, But clearly, that concept means absolutely nothing to you. Ryan's voice rose defensively. Respect? I've earned mine the hard way. I built that bike with my own two hands, paid for every part with money I earned. I don't take orders from anyone who's never straddled a motorcycle in their life. Then you should have stayed on the road, Caprio said flatly. That line hit harder than Ryan expected. For just a moment, his grin faltered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The judge leaned forward, his gaze steady and penetrating. You've been warned 6 separate times. You ignored every certified letter sent to your address. You destroyed city property. You endangered lives. And now, you've lied to this court under oath. You walk in here acting like you're above everyone else, above the law itself. And for what? A machine that goes fast? Ryan's smirk returned, but it looked forced now. It's not just a machine, Judge. It's a way of life. Caprio nodded slowly. Then that way of life is about to slow down considerably. The biker's eyes narrowed. You can't do that. Oh, I absolutely can, Caprio said, his voice firm and unyielding. And I will. Ryan stepped closer to the microphone, his defiance reaching its peak. You know what your problem is, Judge. You think you're some kind of hero up there, handing out fines, pretending you're fixing the world one parking ticket at a time. But you're not fixing anything. You're just another old, dumb man in a robe playing at power. The courtroom gasped audibly. Several people in the gallery covered their mouths in shock. The bailiff took an instinctive step forward. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change. He simply looked at Ryan Cooper, looked through him, really. For what felt like an eternity, the silence began to burn like acid. Then, in a low, measured voice that somehow carried to every corner of the courtroom, Caprio said, Mr. Cooper, I've been called many things in my years on this bench, but that may be the first time someone's been foolish enough to say something like that twice. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time since walking through those doors, he seemed truly uncertain. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and set them gently on the desk. The way he did it, slow, deliberate, ceremonial, made the entire courtroom fall into breathless stillness. You know what your real problem is, Mr. Cooper, the judge said finally, his voice carrying absolute authority. You mistake defiance for strength. You think arrogance makes you powerful. It doesn't. It just reveals how truly small you really are inside. Ryan's smirk disappeared completely, evaporating like morning fog under harsh sunlight. Caprio's voice rose slightly, steady and resonant, filling every inch of the courtroom. You lied to this court. You endangered innocent people, including children. And you disrespected not just me, but every person who walks through these doors seeking justice. You came here to prove you were unstoppable, untouchable, above it all. He paused, letting the words sink in like rain into parched earth. And all you've proven is that you're completely lost. Ryan looked away for the first time, his jaw tightening, the aggressive fight in his posture beginning to drain away like water from a cracked vessel. Let me make this perfectly clear, Caprio continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. You are not untouchable. You are not above the law. And you are certainly not above basic human respect. He picked up his gavel, his eyes still locked on the motorcycle rider with laser focus. So, since you clearly don't value the freedom you claim to cherish, I'm going to teach you what it feels like to lose it, even if just for a little while. He raised the gavel high. Crack. The sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Effective immediately, Judge Caprio declared, his voice ringing with finality. Your motorcycle license is suspended pending a comprehensive review. You will pay full restitution for the city's damaged property. You will pay every single one of your unpaid fines in full. No payment plans, no extensions. And if you think ignoring this court again is an option, Mr. Cooper, I invite you to try. You'll discover very quickly what the inside of a jail cell looks like, and there won't be any open roads there. The gallery burst into quiet whispers, some nodding in agreement, others wide-eyed with shock at the severity of the ruling. Ryan stood frozen, his face drained of all color. When he finally found his voice, it came out cracked and weak. You can't—" "Say one more word," Caprio interrupted, his voice deadly calm, "and I will hold you in contempt right here, right now. You've said more than enough for one lifetime." Ryan's mouth snapped shut. He lowered his head, finally, truly silent. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, slipping his glasses back on with deliberate care. "Court is adjourned." He struck the gavel one final time. Crack! And just like that, the roar that the biker had brought into the courtroom was silenced completely. For a long moment after the gavel fell, no one in the courtroom moved. The tension hung thick in the air, like exhaust smoke after a burnout, visible and choking. Ryan Cooper stood rigidly at the podium, his jaw twitching, chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths. The smirk was gone now, erased completely, replaced by something much harder to define. Shock, perhaps. Or maybe the first bitter taste of genuine humility. Judge Caprio took a slow, measured breath, resting his weathered hands on the bench. When he spoke again, his voice wasn't angry anymore. It was measured, deliberate, and heavy, with the wisdom of decades spent in that chair. "Mr. Cooper," he began quietly, his tone almost gentle now, "I've spent 30 years sitting in this seat. I've seen every kind of person imaginable walk through those doors. People who've made terrible mistakes. People who've lost their way completely. People who've done truly horrible things but still found the courage to admit their wrongs and try to change." He paused, letting the words settle over the courtroom like snow. "But arrogance," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "Arrogance blinds a person. It convinces them that rules are for everyone else. It whispers in their ear that they can lie, break things, hurt people, and still call it freedom. Still call it strength." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his hands trembling slightly against the helmet he still gripped. "You don't know what it's like out there," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "You don't understand." Judge Caprio leaned forward, his eyes kind but unflinching. "I know exactly what it's like, son. I grew up on these same streets you ride through, the same broken sidewalks, the same struggling neighborhoods. The difference is, I learned something crucial along the way." He let that hang for a moment. "I learned that real freedom isn't about what you can do. It's about what you choose not to do. It's about understanding that your choices ripple outward and touch other people's lives." Ryan looked up, his eyes flashing with a final spark of defiance. "You think sitting up there in that robe gives you the right to tell me how to live?" Caprio's gaze remained steady and calm. "No, but it gives me the duty, the responsibility, to tell you when your choices endanger other human beings." He gestured toward the photographs, still sitting on the podium. "That fence you demolished? It protected children walking to a daycare center. Toddlers, Mr. Cooper. If you'd been 2 seconds faster, if your timing had been slightly different, we wouldn't be discussing fines and suspended licenses. We'd be planning funerals." The words struck like physical blows. The gallery remained utterly, completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. Ryan swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling like a sandcastle facing the tide. His hands gripped the helmet so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. Judge Caprio continued, his tone softer now, but no less firm. "You think calling me an old man is an insult. But let me tell you something about being old, son. It means I've been around long enough to see what happens when young men like you don't slow down. It means I've buried enough arrogance and recklessness to recognize it when it's standing right in front of me, dressed in leather and chrome. He let that statement breathe for a moment, then added, almost gently, "You still." He let that statement breathe for a moment, then added, almost gently, "You still have something most of them never get, Mr. Cooper." Ryan looked up, confused. "Yeah? What's that?" "Time," Caprio said. "You still have time to decide what kind of man you're going to be." The words didn't land like a threat. They landed like a crossroads. For the first time since he'd strutted into that courtroom, something in Ryan's face shifted. The fight was still there, but now it had company. Something raw and unsettled lurking just behind his eyes. The judge's voice softened, but it didn't lose its authority. "You think I enjoy taking people's licenses? You think I like watching grown men walk out of here humiliated, broke and angry? I don't. I'd much rather see them walk out better than they walked in." Ryan swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You don't know anything about me," he muttered again. But there was no real heat behind it this time. Caprio leaned in slightly. "Then tell me, Mr. Cooper. Tell me who you are when you're not hiding behind that jacket and that helmet. Because right now, all I see is a scared young man who thinks loud exhaust and fast riding are substitutes for courage." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't fire back. Not this time. The judge watched him closely. "How old are you?" 32, Ryan said after a beat. "You got kids?" Ryan hesitated, then shook his head. "No." "Parents still around?" A muscle jumped in Ryan's cheek. "My mom," he said quietly. "She lives in Cranston." "Does she know you're here today?" He almost laughed. "No, I don't tell her about this stuff." "Because you don't want her to worry," Caprio said. Ryan shrugged, but it was less defiant now. "Something like that." The judge nodded slowly. "You know what worries mothers the most, Mr. Cooper? It's not tickets, not fines. It's getting a call at 2 in the morning telling them their son isn't coming home." Those words hit harder than any gavel. Ryan stared at the floor. "I've had to call those mothers," Caprio continued quietly. "Fathers, wives. I've had to look at photographs of bodies crumpled in the street next to machines they thought made them invincible. And every single one of them believed it wouldn't happen to them. Right up until the moment it did." He let the silence sit. Let the weight of reality sink through leather and into skin. Then Caprio straightened, his voice firm again. "You're not walking out of here today with just a suspended license and a stack of fines," he said. "That would be easy, too easy. And I'm done making this easy for you." Ryan's eyes flicked up, wary. "What does that mean?" "It means," Judge Caprio said, "you're about to get something far more painful than a fine." The choice. The biker's shoulders stiffened. "I thought you already hit me with everything you could." A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of Caprio's mouth. "You really think money and paperwork are the worst things that can happen to you?" He shook his head. "No. The worst thing that can happen to a man like you is being forced to see clearly." Ryan frowned. "I don't follow." "Good," Caprio said. "That means you're listening." He took a breath, then spoke with the kind of calm that sounded almost like a sentence and a lifeline at the same time. "Here's what I'm going to do, Mr. Cooper. And I want you to listen very carefully, because I am not going to repeat myself." The courtroom leaned in as one. "Option 1, Caprio said. "I proceed exactly as I just declared. Full restitution. All fines due immediately. License suspension pending a full hearing. I file the contempt charge and let the system take its course. You'll likely spend time in jail. Your record will follow you for years. You'll be a martyr to your friends and a burden to everyone who actually cares about you." Ryan's throat tightened. His fingers flexed involuntarily around the helmet. "Option 2, the judge continued. "I stay the contempt charge. I keep your license suspension in place. But I attach conditions to it. Hard conditions. Ryan narrowed his eyes. What kind of conditions? Caprio's gaze didn't waver. First, he said, you will enroll in and complete an advanced motorcycle safety course. Not some 2-hour slap-on-the-wrist seminar, but the full program. You will attend every class. You will listen. You will learn. And you will sign in with your full name every time, so I know you were actually there. Ryan opened his mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand and steamrolled right over him. Second, for the next 6 Saturdays, you will report to the city's traffic division at 7 a.m. sharp. You will work with the crew that repairs the damage reckless drivers cause. You will help them replace guardrails. You will mix concrete, haul fencing, paint crosswalks, whatever they assign you. You will spend 6 weeks seeing, up close, what it takes to keep this city's roads safe. A murmur of surprise rippled through the gallery. Caprio wasn't finished. Third, he said, you will spend 4 evenings at the Children's Hospital, volunteering under supervision. Not as a hero, not as a savior. You will read to kids. You will deliver meals. You will sit with parents in waiting rooms. You will look directly into the faces of the people you would have devastated if one of those children had been standing behind that fence when you plowed through it. Ryan's mask cracked again. This time, not with anger, but with something uncomfortably close to fear. And finally, Judge Caprio said, his voice soft but unwavering, in 3 months' time, you will come back to this courtroom. You will stand in that same spot, and you will tell me what you've learned. He let that land. At that point, he continued, I will decide whether to permanently suspend your license or return it under probation, whether to file the contempt charge or dismiss it, whether you walk out of here as the same man who walked in today, or someone worth trusting on our streets. Ryan stared at him like he'd just spoken another language. So, what? You want to turn me into some kind of charity case? Make me a poster boy for traffic safety? Caprio shook his head. No. I want to give you a chance to grow up. The biker blinked. Anger rose, then faltered, then rose again, searching for somewhere to land. What if I say no? He asked finally. Caprio's answer was instant. Then we go back to option 1, he said. Jail, record, suspensions. No second chances. Ryan swallowed. You really think a few hospital visits and weekend chores are gonna change who I am? He muttered. The judge's eyes softened, just a fraction. I don't know if they will, he admitted. That's up to you. My job is to give you the opportunity. What you do with it determines the rest of your life. The room was silent enough to hear the wall clock ticking behind the bench. For a long moment, Ryan said nothing. His chest rose and fell, his gaze flicking between the judge, the photos, the gallery, the double doors that led back to the world he understood. His fingers loosened on the helmet. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its edge. This is really my choice? He asked. Caprio nodded once. It always was, he said. You just don't usually get to see it this clearly. Ryan looked down at the photographs one more time. The twisted fence, the broken metal, the empty walkway leading toward the daycare. He let out a slow breath that sounded more tired than angry. Fine, he said quietly. I'll do it. The judge leaned forward slightly. Which option, Mr. Cooper? Ryan looked him in the eye. Option 2, he said. I'll take the classes, the work, the hospital, all of it. His voice shook just enough to betray that this wasn't bravado. This was something else, something new, a flicker of something that might one day become humility. Caprio's expression softened, but he did not smile. Good, he said simply. Because if you walk out of here unchanged after everything you've said and done today, then this courtroom has failed you. And I don't intend to fail. He picked up his pen. Your motorcycle license remains suspended for the duration of this period, he continued. You are not to operate any motor vehicle on public roads until we reconvene. You will coordinate with the clerk to schedule your safety course, your work assignments, and your hospital volunteering. Failure to attend any one of them will result in an immediate warrant and reinstatement of all original penalties. He looked up again. Do you understand me, Mr. Cooper? This time, there was no smirk, no rolled eyes, no mocking tone. Yes, Your Honor, Ryan said quietly. And for the first time since his name was called, he meant it. The silent walk. The bailiff stepped forward. You can step back, sir. Ryan nodded stiffly, picked up his helmet, and turned away from the podium. The walk to the back of the courtroom felt a lot longer than the strut he'd done on the way in. The leather jacket still creaked. The boots still hit the floor in steady, echoing beats. But the sound was different now, less like a challenge, more like the measured steps of a man carrying something heavy he didn't yet know how to put down. As he passed the first row, he caught sight of an older woman sitting near the aisle, clutching a worn purse with both hands. She looked at him, not with disgust, not with amusement, but with something that looked unsettlingly like recognition. He looked away. At the back, the double doors stood open. His brothers, two men in cut-off denim vests and leather, stood just outside, visible through the glass panels. They'd come to watch the show, to see him handle the judge, to brag later about how Ryan Cooper told some old man in a robe exactly where he could shove his rules. Instead, they watched him walk toward them with his license gone, his weekends spoken for, and his pride bleeding out quietly on the marble floor. One of them, broad-shouldered, tattooed to the fingertips, opened his mouth to crack a joke, then closed it slowly when he saw Ryan's expression. You good, man? He asked. Ryan didn't answer immediately. He looked back once. Judge Caprio was still on the bench, reviewing the next file, preparing for the next case. The warmth had returned to the courtroom. A parking ticket here, a late meter payment there. Ordinary people, ordinary mistakes. But for one man, nothing about this day would ever be ordinary again. Ryan turned back to his friends. I'm walking home, he said. They exchanged a surprised glance. Dude, your bike's out front, one of them said. We'll ride. No, Ryan cut in. I'm walking. He stepped through the doors, feeling, for the first time in a long time, how far the distance actually was between where he'd been and where he needed to go. 6 weeks later, 6 Saturdays changes a lot when you're used to living wide open. The first morning, Ryan showed up at the city yard 10 minutes late, coffee in hand, still wearing his jacket like armor. The foreman, a compact man with calloused hands and zero interest in attitude, didn't bother with a welcoming speech. He just pointed to a stack of fencing in the back of the truck. Grab the end, he said. We're fixing Richmond and Pine today. The words hit like a punch. Ryan grabbed the end. The work was brutal in a way riding never was. Concrete dust in his lungs, sun burning through black leather, muscles aching from hauling posts and rolling wire instead of leaning into curves and throttling out of lights. But it was what came after that started to crack him open. A mom walking her toddler past the new fence, nodding a quiet thank you. A crossing guard telling a worker, "We're glad they finally did something about this. Kids run around here all the time." A little boy pressing his face against the new metal and saying, "Mom, look, it's fixed." The fence didn't care who'd broken it, but the people did. By the third Saturday, Ryan stopped wearing the jacket. By the fourth, he stopped checking his watch every 15 minutes. By the sixth, he was the one loading the truck before anyone told him to. At the children's hospital, the change came faster. He didn't want to be there, not at first. Hospital air smelled like antiseptic and regret. He felt like a fraud walking past parents who clutched coffee cups like lifelines. A nurse handed him a stack of picture books. "Room 214, she said. "He likes stories with dragons." He? Ryan asked. The nurse smiled. You'll know him when you see him. He did. The kid in 214 had half his hair gone and stickers all over his IV pole. He looked at Ryan like he'd just walked in riding a dragon himself. Whoa, the boy breathed. Are you a biker? Ryan hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, kid, I guess I am. The boy's eyes lit up. Do you go fast? Ryan glanced at the worried face of the child's mother in the corner. He looked at the narrow bed, the wires, the machines. He thought about the fence. Not as fast as I used to, he said quietly. Trying to get smarter instead. The boy grinned. My dad says smart is cooler than fast. Your dad's onto something, Ryan said. By the second visit, 214 wasn't the only room asking for the biker who reads stories. By the fourth, nurses greeted him by name. By the last, one of the parents stopped him in the hallway. You ride those big motorcycles, right? She asked. Yeah, he said cautiously. She nodded. Drive safe, okay? My son likes your stories. Something in his chest shifted. For the first time in his life, a stranger's safety request didn't feel like a lecture. It felt like a responsibility. 3 months later, the return. The clerk's voice was the same. The room looked the same. The polished floor, the worn benches, the gentle hum of quiet conversation. But when she called, City of Providence versus Ryan Cooper, the man who walked through the double doors wasn't the one who'd exploded them open 3 months earlier. The leather was gone. No sunglasses. No helmet on the podium this time. Just a man in a plain shirt and work boots, holding a folder that looked very small compared to the case file that had once needed a rubber band to hold it together. He stood at the podium, cleared his throat, and spoke before the judge could. Good morning, Your Honor. Caprio looked up, took him in, nodded once. Good morning, Mr. Cooper. The judge flipped open a thin folder. I've received reports from the traffic division, the hospital, and the course instructor, he said. They all say the same thing. Ryan's grip tightened on the folder. Is that good? He asked. A hint of a smile ghosted across Caprio's face. In this case, he said. Yes. Very. He scanned a page. The foreman says, and I'm quoting, he showed up on time, worked hard, didn't complain, and listened more than he talked. That alone tells me I'm not looking at the same man I saw 3 months ago. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the gallery. The hospital staff says the children ask when you're coming back, Caprio continued. They said one little boy wants a motorcycle when he grows up because the biker who reads books is cool. Ryan laughed under his breath, embarrassment and pride mixing in equal measure. And your instructor, the judge finished, says you not only completed the advanced safety course, you volunteered to help mentor new writers at the shop he runs on weekends. Ryan shifted his weight. They needed somebody who could talk to the guys who think like I used to, he said. I figured I know that language. Caprio set the papers down and looked up. Why? He asked simply. The question caught Ryan off guard. Why what? Why did you actually do it? The judge asked. You could have treated all of this like punishment, like a joke, but you didn't. Somewhere in there, something changed. Why? Ryan stared at the bench for a long moment, searching for words that didn't come easily. Because, he said finally, I saw what happens when people like me don't change. He took a breath. I watched those kids walk behind that fence we fixed, he continued. I saw how close it is to the street. I kept thinking about what you said, about funerals instead of fines. His voice tightened. And at the hospital, he added, I kept seeing these parents who would do anything to keep their kids safe. And I realized I've been blasting through their world like it was my racetrack. He swallowed hard. I thought riding hard made me free, he said. But all it did was make everybody else pay for my choices. He looked up. That That was the dumb part, Your Honor. Not you. The gallery went quiet. Caprio studied him for a long moment. When you called me old and dumb, the judge said calmly, you weren't insulting me. You were describing the version of yourself that walked in here that day. Ryan nodded, shame and understanding mingling on his face. Yeah, he said. I see that now. The final word, Judge Caprio folded his hands. Mr. Cooper, he said, I told you 3 months ago that this was your choice. Not just between two sentencing options, but between two versions of the rest of your life. He paused. I've seen men waste that choice, he continued. You didn't. He reached for his pen. Here is the ruling of this court, he said. The contempt charge is dismissed. Your license suspension is lifted, but with probationary conditions. Any moving violation in the next 12 months will trigger an automatic review of your privilege to drive and ride in this state. Ryan nodded quickly. Understood, Your Honor. You will continue volunteering one Saturday a month at either the traffic division or the hospital, your choice, for the next year. Not because I mandate it, but because I want you to remember that your freedom is connected to their safety. He paused, then added, your unpaid fines are reduced to court costs only. You've already paid far more than money could buy. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes shone with something he didn't bother hiding. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know how to say anything else. Caprio's voice softened. You don't have to thank me, he said. Thank the version of yourself that finally decided to grow up. He slipped his glasses down slightly, looking at Ryan over the top of the frames. And remember this, Mr. Cooper, he said, the words settling over the courtroom like a benediction. You can't outrun the truth. Not on 2 wheels, not on 4, not at all. But if you're willing to face it, even when it hurts, it can take you further than any engine ever will. Ryan nodded, tears balanced stubbornly on the edge of his lashes. Yes, Your Honor, he whispered. I won't forget. Caprio lifted the gavel. Case against Ryan Cooper, he said, is resolved as stated. He struck the block. Crack. The sound echoed. Not like thunder this time, but like a door closing softly behind a man who'd finally decided to stop running. As Ryan walked out of the courtroom, there was no swagger, no performance. Just a man who'd come in convinced he could outsmart the system, and walked out understanding something far more powerful. He hadn't been fighting a system. He'd been fighting himself, and for the first time, he'd finally started to win.